They tried to salvage the credibility of this bizarre expedition by blaming the American justice system for being weaponized against Republicans. But this political extremism quickly melted away when the son of President Biden, the original target of their wrath, was also prosecuted and convicted, like another disarmed felon whose name may now not be spoken on the floor, apparently, by a unanimous jury of his peers on all counts against him. And that trial, unlike the trial whose very existence must be sent down the Orwellian memory hole to save someone hurt feelings, was actually tried in the federal system. So what's left to do now? Well, let's hold the Attorney General of the United States, Merrick Garland, in contempt, of course. This will be sure to placate an unrepentant and anonymous convicted felon from New York and distract everybody else for a day or two. I confess it's a bit rich, Mr. Speaker, to be asked to hold the Attorney General of the United States in contempt of Congress for overwhelmingly complying with the committee's demands by members who voted against contempt citations for Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro, two persons subpoenaed by the January 6th Select Committee who never spent a single minute. Could I have one more?
The gentleman's time has expired.
I grant the gentleman an additional minute.
Bannon and Navarro never spent a minute with the January 6th committee, never turned over a single document to our committee. These people had 0% compliance with Congress. They demonstrated true contempt, which is why they've been sentenced to jail. But Chairman Comer, in his wisdom, would hold the Attorney General of the United States of America in contempt for what I think is 100% compliance, but in any event is something like 98 or 99% compliance. If you think a federal official is not rendered proper compliance, you take them to court, you don't hold them in contempt, and it's rich beyond measure, like a billionaire rich, to be asked to hold the Attorney General in contempt by people who themselves received subpoenas to testify before the January 6th committee, who never rendered a single document nor a single minute of testimony to the January 6th committee. I urge Congress to reject this absurd motion, and I'm happy to yield back to the chairman.
The chair would remind members to refrain from engaging in personalities toward presumptive nominees for the office of president. Recognize the gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I never said I wouldn't testify in front of the January 6th committee. I just want to know what the parameters that testimony were going to be. So I never did say no to that. Second, the speaker before just said we don't know what we're looking for. We're looking for equal treatment under the law. Special counsel Hur found Joe Biden knowingly kept classified information. Joe Biden knowingly disclosed classified information. He told us that on the very first page of his report. And then he told us later why he did so. He said he had strong motivation for ignoring classified procedures because he was writing a book for which he got paid $8 million. Again, we have motive, and we have him knowingly disclosing classified information. But he doesn't get charged. Yet President Trump does. President Trump does by Jack Smith. Jack Smith, the guy who had to file with the court a notice saying that he actually altered the order of the documents he seized on the raid of the president's home.
That was Jamie Raskin putting on full display the hypocrisy of the Republican effort to hold Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress, which would actually go on to pass the House moments later with a 216 to 207 vote, wherein every Republican except one voted for the contempt resolution. The resolution to hold Garland in contempt was over the fact that he didn't turn over audio recordings of President Biden's interview with Special Counsel Robert Hur, even though the House quite literally already has the transcript of that exact interview. But because any excuse is apparently a good excuse to attack Democratic officials and even the president, that is yet again what Republicans are doing with their time in the House majority. Not passing a single bill to, lower costs or ease inflation or lower gas prices, all of the things they quite literally ran on. Nope, their priority has been investigating Joe Biden endlessly despite zero evidence of wrongdoing and zero evidence to back up any of their claims. All courtesy of the very people who stand there wailing about the weaponization of government. Because of course. Now, first of all, this is over Biden's handling of classified documents, which, as we all know, were promptly returned to the National Archives, just as was the case with Mike Pence and a raft of other federal officials, except for one, someone named Donald Trump, who opted to illegally retain his classified documents even after the National Archives sought their return, even after a subpoena was issued for them, and ultimately up to the point where a search warrant was executed by the FBI at Mar-a-Lago. And yet Republicans have defended Trump, the guy who kept his illegal documents, while barreling forward with their clearly very important probe of Joe Biden, the guy who returned his documents. Make sense? Welcome to politics in 2024. The second major issue, Jim Jordan is quite literally hundreds of days delinquent on his own subpoena from the January 6th committee in Congress. He was first issued his subpoena for scheduled depositions on May 27th and June 11th, 2022. It is now June 12th, 2024. He's more than 2 years delinquent. And yet this guy has the audacity to grandstand about how other people should respect congressional subpoenas. To call this a joke would be insulting to jokes. In fact, Mike Johnson was called out on exactly this point, and here's how he tried to square this circle.
You and Leader Scalise talked about the importance of Merrick Garland complying with a congressional subpoena. I'm curious, since Chairman Jordan and 4 other colleagues declined to do that under the January 6th committee, if you worry that undermines the argument at all?
Oh, I'm so glad you brought up the January 6th committee. We'll be talking a lot more about that in the coming weeks. There's been a lot of investigation about that committee. I don't think it was properly constituted. I don't think it was properly administered, and now we know that apparently some of the evidence was hidden and some maybe even destroyed. So you'll hear much more about that in the days ahead. You talk about apples to oranges. There couldn't be a more clear contrast between that and what we're talking about here. This is the Judiciary Committee. This is the Weaponization Committee. These are properly constituted and operating committees under Chairman Jordan's leadership. Have done extraordinary work, methodically, constitutionally, appropriately, and now we come to this impasse with the Attorney General himself who refuses to comply. Look, this is an Article 1 issue. We've got to get it covered well, and I think we will, and I think that's why this contempt will pass on the floor.
So that committee wasn't properly constituted, and so none of those subpoenas count. See how easy that is? All you have to do if you're a Republican official is reject the premise of a committee that doesn't comport with your political agenda, and then any official acts carried out by that committee simply don't count. Convenient, huh? And of course, there is a broader goal at play here by Republicans. They know how corrupt Donald Trump is, especially in light of his criminal conviction in New York, and so their goal here is to make Joe Biden look just as guilty by comparison. They know that they can't convince Americans that Trump's hands are clean, but they can try to convince everyone that the Biden administration's hands are just as dirty. And so that's the goal. They will issue contempt resolutions and impeachments as freely as they can, knowing that every time they do, it devalues the legitimate instances in which Trump administration officials or Republicans were dealt those punishments themselves. This is the Steve Bannon model of flooding the zone with shit. They want to delegitimize every valid process of government to the point that nothing means anything anymore. That's what they're doing today. So look, will anything come of this? No. Joe Biden's DOJ is not going to prosecute its own attorney general, and certainly not for a subpoena issued for a deposition for which the transcript was already released and at the hands of a political party whose chairman is over 700 days delinquent on his own subpoena. But if the goal is the optics of corruption, these guys are doing their level best to prove that it certainly does exist, only it's within the ranks of the Republican Party. I've got a really exciting announcement. I've written a book. It's called Shameless. This book explores how Republicans have exploited their historical branding while attacking our democracy, how the media has proven itself a willful participant, and how Democrats can learn from this to rebalance the political scales and save our democracy. It has been a lifelong dream of mine to write my own book, and so I'd like to ask you to pre-order it by clicking the link right here on the screen. And if you buy within this pre-order period, your book is going to come with a signed nameplate. As you know, I've never had a single sponsor on my channel. I don't ask for money or anything like that, but if you're looking for a way to support me, this is hands down the best way to do it. So again, follow the link right here on the screen, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for pre-ordering Shameless. And as always, make sure to subscribe to see more of my content.